Hi, everyone. Welcome and good evening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for our Black August teach-in. We are going to give it just one more moment before we get started. So thank you for your patience. In the meantime, though, please feel free to use the chat to introduce yourself, share your name, maybe the org you're joining with, or where you're calling in from. We'd love to know who's in the room. Okay, again, good evening, everyone, and welcome. We are going to get started now. I want to thank you all for joining us and being here tonight. My name is Asada Mann, and I'm the Senior Community Organizer at the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. We are very proud to host this event tonight, along with our co-sponsors that we'll share in a moment. I'm very excited to be moderating this conversation and this program tonight. Again, we are very excited to welcome you here for our very first teach-in focused on reparations and the origins and history of Black August, which we'll dive into. This program tonight is called From Resistance to Reparations. Again, it is part of our full month of Black August programming. In fact, this month the Institute will be marking and celebrating, commemorating this month by honoring the courageous activists who, for generations upon generations, have fought and continue to fight for racial justice and equity. So we're really excited to be having this discussion with you all here tonight. Before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping notes we want to share. Number one, of course, we're on Zoom, so we do ask everyone to please stay muted throughout the call so that we don't have any interruptions. On the other hand, though, obviously that we have the chat, so feel free to use the chat to ask questions throughout or share comments, share feedback, share your own stories and perspective. We really appreciate that. And again, please use the chat to introduce yourself tonight, share what organization you may be affiliated with or where you're calling in from tonight. So Yep, we can go to the next slide. In today's program, just to give you all a sense of the agenda, we're going to be covering a few things. Number one, we will be starting by going over and sharing some principles for our discussion today, as well as any future organizing around our reparations work. We'll also be providing a brief history of Black August, its origins, and how it is typically remembered and commemorated, and how it connects to our work for reparations. We'll also give you a few highlights and go through the recently released New Jersey Reparations Council report. And then finally, we will go into what we can be doing in this moment to organize, to build power for and momentum for reparations. So of course, we have some goals up here on the screen for this particular teach-in. We are going to be grounding ourselves in this history of Black August, but also the ongoing legacy of resistance. We will be diving into and truly uncovering the truth about New Jersey's history of slavery and ongoing racial injustices and harm. We'll break down what reparations are, what they are not, and why now is the perfect time more than ever for New Jersey to work towards repair. As I mentioned, we will share what's in the New Jersey Reparations Council report, as well as the proposals in there to address slavery and post-slavery harms. And we will be exploring strategies and key actions we can use to organize a movement for reparations. Next slide, please. Okay, and quickly, I want to thank all of the organizations who co-sponsored and supported this evening's event. Really quickly list them off: People's Organization for Progress, Returning Citizen Support Group, Black Lives Matter, Patterson, the New Jersey Faith Allies for Reparations Task Force, UU Faith Action NJ, New Jersey Working Families Alliance, League of Women Voters of New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance, DOMA Action, the Whitesboro Historic Preservation Project, the Greater Asbury Park Historic Revival Project, the New Jersey State Conference, NAACP Youth and College Division, the Jersey Bee, Salvation and Social Justice, Faith in New Jersey, and the Participatory Budgeting Project. I know I see a lot of people from those organizations on the call here tonight, so feel free, folks, to use the call to share links to your organization's site or social media, anywhere that people can find out more information about you. And I quickly want to introduce some of tonight's amazing speakers. They're in for a real treat. We have some experts and practitioners in the field, longtime activists and advocates joining us tonight to share their knowledge and insight. First, we have Jean-Pierre Brutus, who is the Senior Counsel in the Economic Justice Program at the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, my colleague, and my other colleague as well, Laisa Alexis, who is a research fellow for the New Jersey Reparations Council. We have Baba Zaid Muhammad, who is the lead organizer for the New York's Malcolm X Commemoration Committee and its last original member. He's also an lead organizer for New Jersey Communities for Accountable Policing, an associate producer for All Politics Are Local. It's a weekly online hip hop political talk radio show based at the campus of Rutgers University North, and so many other things. He wears many, many hats. And then finally, we are joined by the amazing Charlene Walker, Executive Director of Faith in New Jersey. So again, very excited to have them all on here with us this evening. Okay, next slide. And with that, I'm going to actually introduce and pass the floor to my colleague Laisa. She'll be the first speaker tonight.
All right, y'all. Can y'all hear me? Just a thumbs up, just so we do a mic check. All right. Hi, everyone. So we're just going to go over some of our values and principles, some of the things that we really want to keep in mind as we organize around reparations and try to make it a reality in our state. So building power seems sort of very, very sort of straightforward, right? We're thinking about ways that we want to build lasting people power, right? Especially amongst Black folks who are most affected by the harms of slavery and post-slavery racial injustice. We organize to win, not just legislative and like policy victories, but also just to sort of gain a sort of sense of agency and autonomy amongst of the folks that we organize with, right? We want to shift political, cultural, and moral power so that Black folks are always winning, right? And that leads into our sort of next thinking, right? Grassroots leadership, right? We're focused on working with folks, not just the people who went to school and like modeling, right? We're interested in working with just regular folks and making sure that everybody is as involved as possible and really talking to communities and figuring out what is most effective in sort of building this kind of people power that we're interested in. We're also really interested in flexibility and innovation, right? We want to make sure that we're always sort of figuring out what the next move is, how we best can advocate for the things that we really want to see happen, in this case, reparations, right? What are the tactics and conversations that we need to be having? Who do we need to be having it with, et cetera, so that we're constantly making sure that we are flexible and malleable and changing whatever moment while still sticking to our core values and principles. We understand that reparations is a world building project, right? So we keep our eyes on the prize, right? We have a future orientation where we're organizing for freedom. And so we're not bogged down by sort of present failures, right? Because we understand that our goal is much bigger than our present moment, right? And with the report, with the release of the report and just the movement for reparations in general, we're interested in bold truth telling, right? We're not interested in sort of continuing the lies that the US has told Black folks about their position in this country, right? We're interested in making sure that everybody in New Jersey knows that New Jersey was a slave state and was the last northern state to abolish slavery, right? So all these things are sort of the things that guide our work, part of the things that guide our work here at the Institute, but also one of the things we hope to infuse in this movement that we're interested in building. So you can go on to the next slide.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Laisa. Really appreciate that grounding for us. Next, I want to bring on our next speaker. Just want to make sure he is on. Baba Zaid, are you here?
Yeah, I am
There we
here.
go. Okay. So we're gonna spotlight you just so everybody can see you. Okay, so we are going to give Zaid the floor. He is going to be giving us a history of Black August, walk us through the origins, and really the intention behind this month, as well as giving us some insight into how it is typically commemorated and some values. That we should carry from us as we reflect on Black August. So, floor is yours, Baba Zaid. Thank you.
Well, that sounds a little different from what I was originally tasked to do, Mrs. Sada, but it's okay. And
I'm
by
sure it'll
that
be
I mean
great.
one of the one of the cornerstones of the practice and the observation of Black August is support for political prisoners, right? And America has a long, although somewhat secret history with the fact that it has and has over the years people they have targeted for repression and made them political prisoners. And so I did a mini presentation to really walk you through that important dimension of Black August because the political prisoner question is a hugely important question for some of the bravest among our people who have made some incredible sacrifices and who are literally paying with their lives. And when I get to somebody by the name of Matulu Shakur, I want to really, and Callie House really talk about how that absolutely relates to the very question of reparations. Right, Black August was started in the literally in the prison system, in the California prison system. Today is the anniversary of the death of Jonathan Jackson. Jonathan Jackson was 17 years old when he tried to lead an extraction mission, literally an armed action, in the Marin County Courthouse in Greater Los Angeles to free some of what was known as the Soledad brothers. It's a mission that militarily failed, unfortunately, and almost everyone was killed in that mission, except the one and only Rochelle St. McGee, who wound up becoming our longest political prisoner. August 21st is the anniversary of the death of his brother, his big brother, George Jackson, who was probably the most important prison writer of the 1960s era and beyond. George was a field marshal for the Black Panther Party at San Quentin Prison. And he wrote a series of letters in a book called Blood in My Eye that reflected his grasp of revolutionary theory and practice and had a particular responsibility for sending Black men who were leaving San Quentin Prison into the Black Panther Party in the California system. There was a formation also that grew up in that space called the Black Guerrilla Family. There was a very militant branch of Black men within the prison system. And it's within that circle that this notion of Black August would develop. On August 1st, 1978, one of their members, Katari Galden, who had been trying to develop this idea, died in prison. He died in prison from medical neglect that was typical of what happens inside America's concentration camps. So in 1979, from spaces that supported our people who are inside, the surviving remnants of the Black Panther Party, emerging remnants of what is now known as the New African Independence Movement, right? That is where Black August began to live. And there's also where reparations lived in our community, right? The New African Independence Movement played a particularly important role in the making the question of reparations one of our fundamental human rights questions that should something that we should consider, and it's often associated with the presence of the incredible Queen Mother Moore, Audley Moore, who was a Louisiana / Harlem legend, who was a died in a Woolgarviite once upon a time, who made that one of her hallmark on her walk for her very long walk. She lived into her 90s, and she's definitely important to the question of the evolution of reparations. But let's get to political prisoners. You can whoever's in charge of the slide, y'all should start with y'all. I think everybody would recognize this face, right? Then I should say some things about me and my relationship with this incredible woman. Um, this is Assata Shakur. Assata was in the New York chapter of the Black Panther Party. She worked in the medical cadre of the Black Panther Party, and she also worked with something that was called the National Committees Against to Combat Fascism. I hope y'all appreciate what I'm saying with that because that's very germane to this particular period. Uh, in the attacks that began to come at the New York chapter of the Black Panther Party, she found herself becoming a person of interest in some uh, allegations that were being made against party members in an attempt to destroy the party through what we now know as COINTELPRO. With that, her and some others went underground and created something called the Black Liberation Army. The Black Liberation Army, contrary to what has been said about the Black Liberation Army by the state, in New York especially, made a particular point to attack and combat the drug scourge, the heroin wave that organized crime and corrupt policing was very much complicit in bringing into our community. Uh, and she has, paid some prices on that front, as well as ultimately being charged with what happened to her here in New Jersey. So I want to start the political prisoner question right here in New Jersey. We could even go back further with Mr. Robeson, Paul Robeson, right? The tallest tree in our forest, spoke 25 languages, and who went through a banning of travel and a whitelisting during the McCarthy era, another fascistic moment in this country's history, right? And Robeson was denied the right to make a living and the right to travel by virtue of how he was whitelisted. He missed by a hair of being a full-fledged political prisoner himself. But Assata, May 2nd, 1973, her, Sundi Ala Koli, who will be my next slide, I'll come to him in a minute or two, and Zaid Shakur were on the New Jersey Turnpike. And this is back in 1973 when they were confronted with a horrible expression of what we now know as racial profiling. Racial profiling was born here in the slave state of the North in 1921 with the advent of the New Jersey State Police, right? And that led to a fatal confrontation where a state trooper was killed, where Zaid Shakur was killed. And folks may not know who Zaid was. Zaid was a brilliant negotiator for the Black Panther Party. And often I call him the forgotten man of the Turnpike attack. And Assata and Sundiata being wounded and captured and ultimately tried for murder and sent to prison. Of course, Assata would have the distinction of being liberated from prison by that same underground that I described back on November 2nd, 1979, right? And it was an incredible feat that many of us proudly claim, even though it's a space that too few of us would dare to step in, because it is indeed military, it is indeed dangerous, and it requires quite a sacrifice. But people like the late Sekou Udenga and others are said to have been responsible for the liberation of Assata Shakur from the Clinton facility, right? And that ties directly and then also to the work of the Institute. The Institute has recently lifted up a whole question of abuse, the degree of sexual abuse that many have gone through in prison system, particularly amongst younger people in the juvenile system. Assata was lifting that up in Clinton back in the 70s when she was in captivity, right? So this is an old issue that is finally starting to see some light of day. And in the spirit of our ancestors, the mantra that we should appreciate here is to never give up. right? Sundiata did 49 years in prison, right? I'm going to come to him and keep ruling, moving in the interest of time. They said he would never see the light of day, but we never gave up. He was not given a death sentence. He was given the sentence of life plus 30 years, and he did what that means in real time. And we did all that we could by refusing to give up to ultimately get him out of prison. I had this distinct pleasure when I was a young man back in 1988 to do the first book party in the country for Asada, an autobiography. And why is that important? And that directly relates to our ancestors in captivity. By Asada daring to tell her own story, she took back something that was taken from our enslaved ancestors. She took back her tongue, a capacity to tell her own story. That book would become catalytic for the beginning of a real conversation about political prisoners in the United States. It would come to a head in 1990 when we had a human rights tribunal on that very question. And it involved judicial scholars from all over the world that converged at Hunter College in New York City back in October of 1990 that absolutely came to the conclusion that the United States does indeed have political prisoners in this country, and it ought to do something to redress that, right? And we came out of that particular uh, space, out of that particular conversation, with the priority to really lean in the efforts to free one Mumia Abu Jamal. And we can move the slide ahead. Now let me stop here for a second. Go back to inadmissible evidence. This book is done by a. All right, there we go. All right. This book, if you can get this book, it is an excellent companion to any if you have a Sada's book, because it tells the story from a legal uh, vantage point, and it also tells the story from expanding Asada's family heritage. Asada was a freeman, and she comes from a family that fought for the preservation of their land in Wilmington, North Carolina. And Wilmington, North Carolina was the scene of an epic, uh, bloody, uh, clan based coup of the last representation in Congress of Black folks coming out of the Reconstruction era. Right? Asada comes from a family of survivors who fought against that tooth and nail long before she became this epic figure in the lore of the Black Panther Party. So that's a companion that I want you to get. Now, I mentioned Mumia, and I also, but then I think who's my next slide? Was my next slide Matulu? Let's go right to Matulu. This is a younger audience. All of y'all are younger than me, right? And most of y'all would have your own relationship and identification with or around somebody by the name of Tupac Amaru Shakur. Pac was the most famous cub of the Black Panther Party, or child of the Black Panther Party, right? His mother, Afeni Shakur, literally defended herself during the Panther 21 trial while she was pregnant with that young man, right? And that is indeed a kind of a miracle birth. To try and give birth under those kind of circumstances is indeed an incredible feat, an incredible story in and on its own terms. Afeni, who was an incredible organizer in her own right, would later marry this young man, Matulu Shakur. And I'm calling him young because Matulu was involved in struggles go as far back as his teenage years, when he was 17 years old, right on up to the end of his life just a little while ago. Matulu was famous for a lot of things. He went to China with the Black Panther Party, saw the value of something that we call acupuncture, and became a full-fledged acupuncturist himself, trained doctors in the United States to move into acupuncture, and to do that as a way to combat, uh, in a medical way, in a healing way, the drug scourge, the heroin scourge that was coming at our community. He was an amazing healer on top of being the military person that we later know him to be. Matulu would also advance a notion in the 1980s called the truth in reconciliation notion. We would see this ultimately blow up with the dismantling of apartheid, right? And it's a convening of the key players of what it meant for violence in those particular settings in the apartheid setting. Mutulu called for something similar here in the United States around political prisoners in the United States as far back as that era, right? And it's something that is overlooked about his legacy. He was absolutely incredible. He ultimately went underground when he faced being targeted and was considered a part of that crew that perhaps was involved in the liberation of Asada herself back in 1979. He wound up doing 49 years in prison. Around the time I was organizing for Asada's book party, we, Matulu was being convicted and sent to prison for his underground activity, right? 49 years, just like, no, I'm sorry, Sundiata did 49 years. Matulu did 36 years in prison. We got him out on a medically compassionate release just a year and a half ago because he was dying of cancer. He was blessed to have him with his family and not have to die in the clutches of the state. That's Dr. Matulu Shakur, Tupac's stepdad, right? Let's move ahead. Who we got next on the queue? Who's up next? Right? I mentioned Mumia, right? I'm going to put some things in the chat before this night is over. Some videos that I want you to look at. You should see and hear Asada. If those of you who have never heard her speak before, talk about her comrade Mumia Abu Jamal, just how impactful he was in her life, in the life of her comrades in the Black Panther Party, and how he has become a global figure in spite of his captivity. Mumia is a journalist, right? He was the head of the National Association of Black Journalists in Philadelphia in his 20s when he ran into a horrible ordeal with a very corrupt Philadelphia police in 1981. He joined the Black Panther Party when he was 15 years old, when he found himself being beaten by George Wallace supporters. George Wallace was the former governor of Alabama, died in a wool segregationist who was gearing up for a presidential run in 1968. Mumia thought he could run to the police for help. The police added to the beating that those racists gave him and literally kicked his behind, and he said kicked his behind into the Black Panther Party. As a teenager, he would be a major contributor to the Black Panther newspaper and would develop that unique polemical style that is so important to the edge of his work that made him an incredible internationally regarded journalist before he ran into the clutches of the state. In December of 1981, December 9th in particular, uh, found himself running into a bullet trying to come to the aid of his brother, who was in a situation where he was being beaten by a Philadelphia police officer. A third person who was with his brother uh, actually turned on the officer himself, was armed, and took that officer out. That officer's name was Daniel Faulkner. Mumia, wounded on the scene, was charged with Faulkner's killing. He's maintained his innocence from the very beginning. He went to trial in the worst way with a public defender who was not at all prepared or resourced to handle a death penalty case. And he was put before a judge known as Albert Sabo, who was considered one of the most racist and death penalty heavy-handed judges in the state at that time. Philadelphia and the state of Pennsylvania had its architect giants of racism during that time. And Sabo was one of them. We're still trying to get Mumia out. Mumia was given a death sentence on the 4th of July weekend in 1982. We were able to ultimately get that death sentence overturned by virtue of some heavy protests over the years. And Mumia does indeed have a global support network around the world, but he is languishing now on what he calls slow death row, having had major health challenges, and has now been wrongly incarcerated for 43 years, right? And I want folks to appreciate the work that Prison Radio does. It's a place where a lot of Mumia's most contemporary commentaries are kept, right? So you can hear his voice regularly. I'm in negotiation with the radio space that I work with to begin to air Mumia's commentaries as a way to open our show. We had a show on WBAI years ago called Where We Live that was led by Sally O'Brien, and she did that in Pacifica Radio, that's WBAI, for years. And that was a big opening for Mumia in radio spaces back then, and we want to keep that opening going. All right, that's Mumia Abu Jamal. You can move forward. This is Mumia's latest book. Mumia has written over 10 books, and most of them were written in spite of his captivity. This is an anti-prison reader that he co-edited with Jennifer Black, a young scholar whose parents are old school lefties and activists in their own right in the Pennsylvania area. They're old school abolitionists, and this book will give you a handle on how political prisoners have tried to speak for themselves in this country. And of course, there's a chapter there on Malcolm that is important to what I do around Malcolm X, and of course, some of his comrades in the Black Panther Party. We will be having a book signing for this book sometime before the year is out, as a way to support Mumia and to keep his name out in the ether. We can go to the next one. This is heavy, and this is the most urgent space that we're in right now for political prisoners, right? Anybody anywhere near my age would recognize who this man is, right? But those of you who do not recognize this man, we should, right? One of the most important organizations in the civil rights movement was the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, best known as SNCC by the acronym of SNCC. Just recently, July 17th was a big day of action for John Lewis, an early SNCC chair, right? This is H. Rat Brown, formerly known as H. Rat Brown, right? Straight out of the swamps of Louisiana, who is now known as Imam Jamil Abdullah El Amin, right? The Imam was the last chair of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Him and his previous chair, Stokely Carmichael, formerly known as Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture, someone who I was close to in my own way also, were the last two chairs of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and they represented, along with James Foreman, I would dare say, their most radical expression, right? And Kwame and Imam Jamil were particularly one to recognize and to force the question of the limits of nonviolence, right? That tactically we can approach nonviolence, but as a way of life, it might be a bit too much, facing the kind of violent racists that we've been facing in this country. A pivotal moment for that organization was 1965. There was a man by the name of James Meredith. He was the first person of African descent to be allowed to integrate the University of Mississippi. And he did what is called a walk against fear. He literally tried to march across the state of Mississippi by himself as a statement of courage against Klan terror. In the middle of that march, the Klan shot him. He survived it, but the civil rights organizations who were in the South at the time convened very quickly and said, we have to complete that march as a mass action in honor of James, in honor to uphold his principle that we have to stand up against fear and that we're not going to be cowed into a perpetual second-class citizenship. At the end of that march, Kwame would make that epic call for Black power, and that would represent a left shift within the Black liberation movement in general, and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was all a part of that. Right after that, this man became chair of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Now he was so intense and had his own military background by virtue of the armed self-defense traditions that he was associated with in Louisiana, that in the 1968 and 1967, those epic summers of uprisings, he became a very national player. He was here in Newark in 1967 for the National Black Power Convention that took place in the immediate aftermath of the Newark uprising. And it was very strong in that space. But quiet as it's kept, in 1968, the federal government, a very liberal, Congress at the time that had passed the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Bill, came up with something called the H. Rat Brown Act. And this was an act that would criminalize organizing across state lines of a certain kind. Because uprisings were so much the order of the day, organizers like him were charged with starting riots. And so this was a bill to try and criminalize him as an organizer in the name of starting riots. He was terribly feared then, and he continues to be feared to this day. He would later go underground along with other Panthers in the Black Liberation Army, attacking the drug trade. And he wound up getting captured on a weapons charge and did a bid for a few years as a consequence of that. Leaning on Malcolm X, he became a Muslim in prison, leaned on his faith, and came out Imam Jamil El-Amin. When he came out, he went to Atlanta, Georgia, and began to organize Muslims to clean up the west end of Atlanta, Georgia, in a way that was very in step with Malcolm's legacy. And again, not forgotten by the state, he became a target all over again. Right? In 2000, two Fulton County sheriffs were shot suddenly by someone, and one of them was killed, and the imam became the target. Now we know since then that there was somebody by the name of Otis Jackson. Y'all can go to the next slide. I want y'all to remember this name, Otis Jackson, someone who confessed to the crime that Imam Jamil was charged with, right? And Imam has been sitting in prison for 22 years. And the state knows that this is the guy who confessed to this under oath, confessed to it under oath several times, whose physical makeup and DNA all comports to the physical evidence, but they do refuse to even acknowledge it legally because it is the man that they have been wanting to take out of circulation since his days in the civil rights movement. There was at the beginning of there should have been a definition that I wanted to share with you from the Jericho movement, because as we wind up, I want to give you some places to go to support this work. Back in 1998, many of us came together to form what was the Jericho movement. And the Jericho movement became an umbrella for political prisoners in the United States. It was led at that time by Herman Ferguson, who was a comrade of Malcolm X and the founder of the Malcolm X Commemoration Committee and a former political prisoner himself. Safia Asia Bukhari, who was in the Black Panther Party and the Black Liberation Army and a former political prisoner herself. They were its principal leaders at its inception. And if you go to the JerichoMovement.com, if you want any information to begin to check in on how to connect with our political prisoners, their contact information is there. How can you support political prisoners? And I'll wind down here. Several things. One, write them. Most of them have been put into spaces where they're far removed from their families and their communities in the name of trying to have them forgotten for what they were, for what they meant to us and their value to us. Write them. That humanizes them, that puts them in real contact in real time with the community that they sacrificed them for, right? Find out how to provide commissary for them. We have done fundraisers from our organization for 25 straight years that were big fundraisers that they loved, they and their families loved, especially that helped raise commissary for our political prisoners. If you hear about any
Okay, I think we might have lost Baba Zaid, at least his audio. Can you hear us, Said? All right, all right. Well, sorry, folks, about the technical issues here. I think Zaid was going to wrap up and finish by talking about Cali
Can y'all
House.
hear me now?
Yeah, now we can hear you.
I'm sorry. I don't know what the hell happened. I just on the roll
No
and I was
worries.
trying to tell y'all, how to connect to political prisoners with commissary, right? And we'll come to Callie and round it up because she is hugely important to the question of reparations, right? But the Jericho movement, the Imam Jamil Action Network. Imam Jamil is terminally ill, and under no circumstances should he die in the clutches of the state. So there's a full-fledged campaign that's going to be reenacted to call for his release and the clearing of his name. And only 2 political prisoners have been released with their names cleared: Deruba Ben Wahad, who I work with personally, and Geronimo Jijaga Pratt. Everybody else had to walk through doing their whole time, and they come out of prison with nothing but their scars. But where does the question of political prisoners begin in terms of the modern Black freedom struggle? For years, we have said that it began with Mr. Garvey, the framing of Mr. Marcus Garvey using mail fraud, the pretext that was used back then. But that would not be correct. One of the forgotten voices in the epic struggle for reparations is this Black woman, Callie House. She was the bridge from the 19th century to the 20th century on the question of reparations, and a ferocious organizer who had support in her organization. And the organization has a long name, the National Ex-Slave Mutual Bounty Pension Association. Had members in the hundreds of thousands, in a way that would anticipate what Mr. Garvey would later do with the UNIA. And one of the places where she really built up her membership was making good use of mail order work. The mail. And what did they come at her with? They came at her with mail fraud. And she wound up doing time for advocating for reparations and for building up a national base in the hundreds of thousands. I mean, anywhere between 300 and 600,000, depending on what source you want to look at and deem credible, right? But in that time, no cell phones, no internet, no cable TV, none of that. That was absolutely remarkable, right? And she just and she dared, before she was taken into captivity, she launched a lawsuit against the Department of Treasury that actually got into court, right? And that's what really got the ire of the government to really move on her around the question of reparations. And she should not be forgotten, right? So for those of you who think, and this is particularly when we're trying to talk to in our community and trying to build support for the question of reparations, I have faced for years, and I've been involved in reparations since my late teens and 20s, and I'm well into my 60s now. Oh, they'll never do that. That'll never get anywhere. But that isn't true, because one of the things that has happened in recent years, and the work of this organization is an example of it, that in recent years, in spite of it being a question that has been segregated with the segregation of our community, right? Reparations has broken into multiracial space. We get solidarity now from interfaith leaders who are from all stripes. We get solidarity from the Asian community, particularly the Japanese community, who survived American concentration camps and who won on the question of reparations, right? The organization I just left, the Equal Justice USA, that got shut down by virtue of the government cuts that had been harsh on a lot of social justice work, and that's on our community-based violence intervention work in particular, right? One accomplishment that I had with that organization is that y'all can't talk about restorative justice without claiming and getting serious about its grandmother, and its grandmother is the question of reparations. That was a multiracial space that I personally had come out for reparations, and to have that conversation in multiracial spaces. The advance that we see in different states, like how far California went, that is a consequence of the question of reparations breaking into multiracial space, right? Institute for Social Justice is not a Black nationalist organization like my Malcolm X Commemoration Committee or the Black Panther Party or Mr. Garvey's UNIA. It's not that, right? It is a multiracial organization committed to social justice. And the fact that this organization has played a catalytic role recently in creating this New Jersey Reparations Council and putting together this landmark study is an example of breaking through that old log jam of denial from the other side that this can happen. We say it can, we don't know when, but on the mantra of our ancestors, on the shoulders of our ancestors, we say never give up. And we're not going to give up until we win the reparations that we need. And we want it in a way that will change the world and prevent what happened to our ancestors from ever happening again. I'll leave you with a chant that we use in the political prisoner work. Y'all say, y'all came up with, say the word reparations around our political prisoners. We say, what's the call? Free them all, right? So thank you for your time and attention. I'm going to put some things in the chat that places to go that I didn't put in these slides that I referred to, that'll give you some places to move forward. And I hope everybody does something who's in this call this month to do something for our political prisoners. And don't know where to start, write them. Don't know what to say thank you. Thank you for your sacrifices. And you'd be surprised what that does for them and what they may do for you in your own personal relationship with them. I'll stop there. Thank you for the consideration.
Wow, thank you, Baba Zaid. We really appreciate and have gratitude for all of the history, knowledge, insight you just dropped on us. Very powerful stuff right here. As Zaid said, he's going to share a few things in the chat, and he also emailed me some things. So we'll be sure to share that out with everybody who registered in a follow-up email. We're a little over time, but we may have some questions, time for questions at the end. So if you have anything for Zaid, please hold on to those questions. But we're going to move right along to our next speakers. My colleagues, Jean-Pierre Brutus and Laisa Alexis, are now going to bring us, to what Zaid was talking about, the Institute's work with our Reparations Council and our current movement right now. So floor is y'all.
Thanks so much, Asada, and good evening, everyone. It's not easy to follow Baba Zaid. I really appreciate that presentation. Thank you so much. I want to thank all of you for being here this evening, taking time out of the evening to learn about Black August, about the history of Black August, and the work that we're doing on reparations here at the Institute with the New Jersey Reparations Council and throughout the state. So when thinking about reparations, I think most of you are going to think about reparations in a particular kind of way. And I think most definitions of reparations are going to evolve around thinking of reparations as taking one form or being one event or being one a time thing, right? And what I really want you all to take away from when thinking about reparations is thinking about reparations as a process, particularly in relation to slavery, as a process to repair the harms of slavery, a transformative process. And to take a phrase that Lalisa had used earlier, a world-building project, a future-oriented project to transform our current society into a new one where Black people can flourish, Black people can thrive, Black people can win, Black people can live in what we're calling a reparative democracy. And so I think most folks will think about reparations maybe as 40 acres and a mule, or they think about cash payments. But, and Baba Zaid talked about the history of Black August, about political prisoners. And I want to invoke that because reparations are within what has been called the Black radical tradition. Right? And as the historian Robin D.G. Kelly has pointed out in his book, Freedom Dreams, and the Black radical imagination, when Black people have been organizing for reparations historically, it has always been this expansive understanding for freedom from slavery and its afterlife. And so at the Institute, one of the ways in which we think about reparations, but particularly in the work of the New Jersey Reparations Council, is to use the framework from the international standard, which really pulls from reparations movements around the world, both contemporary and historical. And it takes 5 different forms. And the reason why it takes 5 different forms is rather than think of it as a one-time thing or taking one form, it's really this process. And that's really key, that's really important. And so, yes, there's compensation that many of you are familiar with. There's also restitution, taking the party that's been harmed and putting them in the place that they were before they were harmed. But the area where I really want to focus on are the sessions and guarantees of non-repetition and rehabilitation. And that is ensuring that the harms that are occurring today, the harms that have accrued, sort of sedimented from the beginning of slavery to now, with Jim Crow and segregation, institutional racism, part of what repair requires is making sure that those harms end, right? As the government and those actors who were responsible and are responsible for those harms seize those harms. And then in terms of rehabilitation, create new laws, new practices, new policies to transform the current site. So that way those harms never continue, but also to ensure repair. And then satisfaction. That means going to the Black populations, Black folks who've been harmed, and engaging them and saying, are those things that we've done, is this repair adequate? Does this meet the standard? Do we have to do additional things that require acknowledgement of the harm and repairing the harm? So those are the 5 different elements of the international standard. That's how we're thinking about reparations. But also, I want you to think about reparations as being part of this larger Black liberation movement, as part of the Black freedom struggle, as part of the Black radical tradition, as part of this movement for thinking about the future, right? And not just about the past, but thinking about the past to inform the present so that we can envision a new kind of future. And that gets me to why we need reparations now, right? We are in a situation where our democracy is under attack, right? Civil rights are under attack, racial justice is under attack, even talking about race is under attack, right? And it's being outlawed in certain places. And part of the work about reparations is that so much of the work around within professionalized racial justice organizations has been around harm reduction, right? How can we tinker around the edges to address the harms of slavery in its afterlife? Rather than take that approach, Ryan and the council and the institute took up the approach that we need to have an affirmative vision, an affirmative alternative vision, right? We cannot just be engaged in the process of small we need to think big. And yes, we take small steps and medium-sized steps to get to the big project, but we need to have that outsized vision, thinking about how do we fundamentally engage the underlying reasons for why we are here. And that begins with thinking about slavery, how slavery shaped, informed, created the conditions that we are in now, right? And so that requires bold vision, that requires courageous leadership, but it requires both an understanding and analysis of why we got here and being clear-eyed about that, and then also providing recommendations and solutions to how to get ourselves out of here. And so I want to give my colleague Laisa an opportunity to talk about the report more concretely and the New Jersey Reparations Council a little more in depth. And then I will follow up afterwards with her about some of the history of slavery in New Jersey. So please, Laisa.
Hi, y'all. So we launched the Reparations Council in June of 2023. It was co-chaired by Khulil Jabbar Muhammad and Tajania Henderson, 2 professors. And it was made up of 9 different committees, right? Sort of around different subject areas. And we gathered experts, researchers, faith leaders, advocates, right? Anybody who sort of lives and breathes this space. To sort of get their ideas as to what sort of history we want to highlight, but also what sort of recommendations we want to come out with the report. So the council met for about 2 years around these 9 subject matters and the relationship to New Jersey's history, specifically the relationship, the history of racial inequalities in our state. And they came out with a report. The report was released this past June. So I encourage you all, if you haven't looked at it yet, to take a look. It's a bit long, but we really want folks to take time and digest. But over the course of those 2 years, right, we also want to point you to the resource. We also did, each of the committees also did sort of public session. That's the word I'm looking for. And all those public sessions are also available on YouTube. If you're interested about the process of coming up with the research, with the questions, with why are these the things that we decided to put in the report, the things that we highlighted as the most important issues that Black New Jerseyans are facing, right? So in the report, like I mentioned, there are a few different areas we touched. I'm going to name all 9. So democracy, right? We're thinking about much more than voting rights, right? But how can we really create a multiracial democracy in New Jersey? Economic justice, right? So what are the ways that we can create ways that Black folks specifically can be healthy economically, right? By closing the wealth gap, maybe thinking about ways that we can have folks have a right to serve employment and have ability to work and feed themselves. Health equity, right? Thinking about ways that we can have Black folks thrive, not just economically, but also physically, spiritually, mentally. Desegregation, right? We talked about the Committee on Segregation, where we looked at the history of New Jersey's segregationist politics, right? We often think that Jim Crow was in other places, but Jim Crow policies also happened here. Our Education Committee, or our Public Narrative and Education Committee, looked at the history of higher education, not just higher education, but education in general in our state, and sort of came up with policies around that. We had our Environmental Justice Committee, right? Thinking about the ways that New Jersey's history as a state with lots of industry, right, has sort of come to deeply affect Black and Brown communities the most, with air pollution, with the exhaust from cars, right, from being next to factories, right, all these things that affect Black communities the most. And we also had our Faith and Black Resistance Committee, right? But we also looked at the implication of faith communities in this history of slavery and where can they fit when we're talking about reparations, right? I think I touched on online. I might have forgotten what a few, but that's essentially sort of all the issues, all the things that we talked about that we sort of discussed in our report. And all the issue areas that we think it's not just about, like Jean-Pierre said, it's not just about direct payments, right? But how can we think holistically around this issue of reparation? You can go on to the next slide, Jean-Pierre. All right, so purpose of the report, right? So a lot of the work that we do at the Institute is around the racial wealth gap, right? And so we looked at the racial wealth gap, right? You see this number here, right? And you see huge disparities amongst Black households, Black and Latino households, and white households, right? The median household wealth is essentially how much your home is worth, right? And just due to the racist history of redlining and this poor access to being able to buy homes, Black folks don't tend to own homes, and also their homes don't tend to be worth as much as white folks. So this is where we have this huge racial wealth gap, right? And so we look at these numbers and we start thinking, like, so what are the things that we can do to really address not just this racial wealth gap, but all the sort of disparities that we see, right? So the purpose of the report, like we mentioned before, is the bold truth telling, right? Recounting the history, right? Don't let them forget what really happened here, right? Don't let them mix up the history and tell you different stories, right? We stand in the truth of what really happened, right? To call out the leaders of our state, right? So Baba Zaid mentioned the Say the Word Reparations initiative that we had a few years ago. And that really came out because our political leaders refused to say the word reparations, right? This concept of reparations really scares us, right? So we're like, okay, you know what? Well, we'll continue to talk about it. Actually, like you're not gonna run away from this, right? But we're also interested in building movements, right? So the report is in the world now. We hope communities will read it, share it with their friends, their family, really get to talking about what's in the report, how they see it fitting into their daily life, right? The report also provides recommendation and really outstates pretty clearly what exactly our demands are and why we are making these demands. We can move on to the next slide. Okay.
All right, thank you so much, Lycia. I appreciate that. And in the report, and hopefully you all have an opportunity to get to read some of it. I think in particular, if you can read the section about slavery in New Jersey. And that particular section is entitled The Slave State of the North. The historian Elaine Buck coins that phrase because New Jersey is a slave society. It's not a society with slaves, it's a slave society, meaning it is reliant on the enslavement of Black people for its creation, for its production, for New Jersey as an entity, as a state, as a colony is not possible without the enslavement of Black people. It is throughout every single county in the state. And one of the ways in which you see how deeply ingrained slavery is in the state of New Jersey is through New Jersey slave codes, but also in the population of enslaved folks, the type of work that they do. Enslaved work, labor becomes a primary form of labor in New Jersey in the 18th century and the 19th century, and really in the 18th century. But really, one of the things I want you all to think about is not just slavery as a form of extracting wealth and uncompensated labor from Black people, but also is the imposition of being. It is governing, regulating, policing Black people. So you can see in 1704, the first slave codes in New Jersey are meant to prevent Black people from congregating together in the evening without the surveillance of their enslavers, right? Forcing Black people to practice certain kinds of religion, forcing Black people to wear certain things, act a certain way, speak a certain way, to govern their conduct, right? Slavery is that very imposition of a way of life, of a way of being, right? And so you see this constant kind of violence to impose that in New Jersey. So you see that codified in the slave codes. You see in the way New Jersey, of all the northern states by 1830, 2/3 of the enslaved population in the North resides in New Jersey. You see in New Jersey's laws, and when the state Supreme Court in 1821 says that the presumption of the status of a Black person in New Jersey is that of an enslaved person. You see that in the way in which land is parceled out in New Jersey, in which white settling families get 150 acres of land for each enslaved person they bring with them. You see in the way in which New Jersey denies and it does not support Lincoln in both elections. You see it in the way that New Jersey supports the Federal Fugitive Slave Act. You see in the way that New Jersey ratifies the 13th Amendment only after the federal government has ratified the 13th Amendment. So you see how dependent upon slavery in New Jersey is, how committed it is, and how committed it is to this violent process, right? To impose this way of being. Another kind of way in which you see New Jersey's commitment to enslavement is that New Jersey passes what's called the Gradual Abolition Act. That's really a misnomer. There is really no gradual abolition. But it was in theory designed to do was that when Black people who were born in 1804, when they turned 18, they were supposed to be freed, or what's called manumitted by their enslavers, and then they would be free for the rest of their life. And then those that turned 18 after this law had been passed, they would also be manumitted, but the state of New Jersey would pay enslavers. What you saw from 1806 to 1811 is that New Jersey began to make payments out to enslavers. But this became extremely costly. But New Jersey was willing to do it. And they paid out such a significant sums that sometimes it was close to 30% of the state's budget. The state had to stop this practice of paying essentially reparations to enslavers because it was going to bankrupt the state because of how enslavers are taking advantage of it, but because of how they valued enslaved labor. Right, so that gives you a sense of the scale and the scope of slavery in New Jersey and its commitment to enslavement. One of the things I also, which is important to me, and I want you to get this ingrained in your head, is slavery not just as a form of extracting of wealth and resources from Black people, but as also imposing this way of being, this way of governing, policing, regulating, enforcing a form of conduct of ruling. Right? It's because after the end of slavery in New Jersey continues with these kinds of practices and policies. It reconfigures essentially white supremacy. And so you see this with Jim Crow and segregation in New Jersey. You see this with all these kinds of forms and practices and patterns of institutionalized racism, and things like redlining. And so one of the key things I think is about this is that the great Saidiya Hartman, when she talks about the afterlives of slavery, right? The badges and incidents of slavery, to take the language of the 13th Amendment. That's what is occurring after the end of slavery in New Jersey, when New Jersey engages, and this is what the report covers and goes into depth, and that I encourage you to read. I want to pass it on to my colleague, Laisa.
So as we mentioned, right, we dug into this history, we laid out a lot of this history, right? And so in order for us to really make the case as to why reparations is sort of the model that we wanted to take on, right? So we call this the blueprint for repair. So what are some of the ways that we can sort of repair some of the harm, but also find ways for Black folks to thrive? So the council takes on a sort of expansive view of reparations. Reparations being both direct payments, but also like specific targeted policies, right? So these targeted policies include things like giving incentives to children in like inner city youth, Black students, whatever, to go to medical school, to go back home and help with Black patients. Policies including scholarships for students who are descendants of slavery in New Jersey. Sort of all these sorts of different kinds of policies so that we can sort of really think about ways that we can help Black folks continue to flourish in the state. We've taken on an affirmative measure, right? So again, we're not just looking back, we're looking forward and thinking about ways that we can really change the dynamics here. So the folks who sort of are eligible in this way of thinking are all Black folks who live in New Jersey, right? And particularly Black descendants of slavery in New Jersey, right? There are many families have lived here for generations and generations and generations, right? And have sort of never been acknowledged in New Jersey's history as being descendants of slavery in the state, because our state likes to pretend like it never happened here, right? And so these are some of the ways that we are thinking about how we want to repair the harm, right? And we are taking this sort of global perspective because we understand that anti-Blackness affects all Black people, right? That the history of slavery affects all Black folks, and history of slavery, not just the history of slavery, but also, as Jean-Pierre mentioned, all the sort of Jim Crow policies that happened afterwards, history of segregation, the last 50 or so years of mass incarceration, right? New Jersey has one of the worst racial inequalities, I guess you could say, in our prison system. About 59% of our prisoners are Black, right? And this is one of the worst rates in the country, right? So all of these things affect all Black folks. And so this is why we take on a sort of holistic perspective. We also want to make sure that we understand that slavery in New Jersey is not unique, right? This is part of a global system in which the subjugation of African people was happening all over the Americas, right? So again, we're thinking globally about how we really want to change and address anti-Black racism. We're starting with New Jersey, but we continue to think widely about how this affects all Black folks. You can go to the next slide. So I wanted to highlight a story that is mentioned in our report, right? As Baba Zaid talks about some of our ancestors, like Kelly House, and some of our political prisoners, right? That we can take inspiration from as to how we want to fight for reparation, how we want to continue to show up for the work that we want to do every day, right? I want to tell you a little tidbit about Timbuktu, right? Well, it's a historical Black settlement in southern New Jersey. And Timbuktu was the place that was the location, right, of this very a great story of Harry Simmons, was an enslaved person who escaped from the South and was welcomed into this community once he arrived to New Jersey. And then kidnappers from the South came to New Jersey looking for Harry Simmons, right? And once the town found out about this and these kidnappers came to their town, they essentially kicked them out, right? They called this the Battle of Pine Swamp, right? This is only this newspaper clipping you see on your screen right now is the only sort of account of this Battle of Pine Swamp that we have, like written account rather, of this Battle of Pine Swamp that we have. What is remarkable about this story is that these folks gathered together, right, to protect one of their own, to make sure that no one else would be sent back into the horrible institution of slavery, right? And so this is the kind of tenacity and soul of resistance that we want to sort of garner as we think about what are the ways we can protect Black folks here? What are the ways that we can protect and help them to continue to grow and live as long as they can in our state, right? How can we take the spirit of Timbuktu into our life now? We can go on to the next slide. Yes, so I'll pass it on to Sada to talk a little bit more. Sada's the expert when it comes to organizing. I know you're gonna deny it, but so Sada will talk a little bit about more how we envision the way that we're gonna organize our folks around this.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Lace and Jean-Pierre, for that. Just helping us to uncover and, be very well aware of what is oftentimes overlooked, forgotten, or just completely intentionally erased in hidden history. that New Jersey has with slavery, but also we know ongoing racial harms past slavery. And then just bringing us to present day, injustices that fall sharply along the lines of race and class. I know there was a question in the chat about, whether New Jersey's commitment to slavery has a connection to current day, um, imbalances and who is incarcerated, who is not. And I think, Laisa answered that very confidently, yes. And so, yes, again, I want to thank them. We will have time, hopefully, for questions. I see we're running a little over time, so I hope folks can stay on a little longer. If not, we will record this and share it out. But yeah, for the next section, we do want to talk about how we can now take this knowledge that we have, starting with the grounding and the framing that Baba Zaid gave us, on the organizing the radical sacrifice of political prisoners, freedom fighters of the past, but also current day. How we can take that, all the information in the report, and then use that to organize and build a movement, a statewide movement for reparations at the state and local level. So I'm going to invite someone who is an expert organizer, who is a very a mastermind organizer and the executive director of Faith in New Jersey, one of our partners. That's Charlene Walker, to talk a little bit about this and talk about some strategies and tactics, values that we can carry with us and try to employ in this work. So with that, I want to invite you, Charlene, to take the floor. Thank you for being here.
Hello, everyone. I hope that you can hear me. Of course, I'm out here organizing, so you might hear a little music in the background in between stops and trainings and strategy sessions. So I'm Charlene Walker. I'm the executive director of Faith in New Jersey, and I organize through a faith-based model of organizing that is central to and grounded into Black radical tradition. Personally, I am committed to building a Black radical left of faith within the country, and organizing on all levels around that. And I deeply believe that all liberation is through Black liberation. And if we do not go for things like reparations, how can any of us be free? So we have to be grounded in that. And I just want to really lift up that Black August was not born in the comfort, right? It was actually born in confinement. It was born from bloodstained pages of like the Soledad brothers and resistance of Attica and the uprisings. And in this radical imagination of people that were deemed disposable. And I really, really want to lift that up because all too often as we organize, people believe that there is only a certain person that can organize. People believe that they do not have a high enough education. They don't have this degree. They can't do this. They're not smart enough. They're not whatever. And we say at Faith in New Jersey that the people that write the best legislation are the ones that are the most impacted. They understand how the system actually works because oftentimes things come from up above or from state houses and it sounds good on paper, but the implementation does not work. So it's really important that if we are going to build a movement for reparations, which let's just be very, very clear, right, is about repairing the harm that's been done, right? We can learn a lot from Black August and from movements past on how we go forward, right? So like Black August, one, it teaches us that revolution begins with study. All too often, a lot of organizing has lost the fact that we can't go forward if we can't learn, right? We have to study from movements of the past. We need to study together collectively so that we can challenge each other in our thinking to actually get us to this dreaming point. Like this Reparations Council, this program came from the imaginations of people that deeply want everyone to be free, right? But it took work in order to get there and for people to think together. So we need to start, when we start thinking about our organizing, we have to infuse it with study, and that's studying the findings that came out in this report, but also studying from our past, reading, like, George Jackson would say that, when he was incarcerated and they had put him in solitary confinement, that's where he met Mao and so many other people in those cells, right? That's when he started to draw the lines to white supremacy and to understand the connections that were not just in the US, but Pan-African connections, right? Like across the globe. So we need to start there to awaken our imaginations. And we need to also understand that discipline is a spiritual act. In Black August, people fast. And that fasting actually was modeled off of Ramadan. And it was really about having discipline and being able to reflect. And I don't know all the things that we're up against right now, lovely people. We are in just as much of a battle from powers and principalities, as Christians might say, to spiritual realm. And we need to make sure that we are grounded for the fight that's ahead and understand that liberation does not require permission. I'm gonna say that again. Liberation does not require permission. We have to shift in our organizing. In New Jersey, we are often seeing that our legislators have become complacent, and that we are pushed and told that, Saul Alinsky is how we must organize, and Saul Alinsky never decided to get us free. Saul Alinsky style organizing was about small wins and small accomplishments and things that we could actually win. But I want to remind us the right is unapologetic about what it wants, and we need to be just as unapologetic as we're going towards reparations. So we have to ground us in that. So that we can actually get to our freedom dreams. And even in the most repressive of systems, Black August teaches us that we have to build relationships that lead to rebellion and actually break chains, right? And that freedom, like I mentioned, has to come with repair. So like in practicality, what does that look like? For us, that really looks like in our organizing, giving back to essentials of building deep community. We are so fractured as a people across New Jersey, that people don't know their neighbors. It looks like actually getting people in rooms to have real conversations about how systems and structures are impacting them. And that begins with one simple question of what's keeping you up at night? And what you realize is when you start to get people in rooms, they will start to identify similar things. And all of those things right now, you can pretty much point to within the reparations findings that can unite each other and get to ask people will start to ask themselves, well, why are we up underneath the same thing? And we can do that political education. So it looks like building those deep connections so that we can actually build a base of leadership of everyday people to organize, just like they did during the civil rights movement. The March on Washington did not happen by one person. They were not following just a charismatic leader. They were following everyday people like my grandmother, who only had the 8th grade education, but she was bringing together people and took a bus down. This is where we need to be. The organizing looks like pushing for pieces of legislation that are actually transformative. And things that I think about offhand are we have so many loved ones, so many political prisoners, and in New Jersey, so many people who, when they were tried and put behind bars to try and be disappeared, they were given life without parole. Or parole for life. So we have elders that are sitting within jail cells right now. We need to pass the second look legislation that will lead to them being set free. We need to uproot our criminal legal system, and that begins with passing the jury of us legislation that's going to actually restore civic participation to people who have been incarcerated. Because New Jersey removes you from being able to participate. So how do you have peers? It just allows the system to continue. We also, I know it was already said, New Jersey has the largest racial inequities within our incarceration system. We must actually look at within those systems too, like how do we help those that are inside have their voices heard outside, and making sure that they are lifted up. No one needs somebody to go for them for liberation. Our people can go together, right? So it's about lifting up those voices in those shared experience. We need to build a clear narrative around really what's happening. honestly, right now, we're living in someone else's imagination, and that imagination has a wonderful narrative. We need to tell the truth unapologetically, which is what this does, but we need to hear the stories of everyday people that are really, really suffering and going to the places, unfortunately, where there is pain. Because where there is pain, there's also power, and helping people to transform that. The organizing also looks like trying to make sure that things that we do win actually come to fruition. There was legislation that was passed not long ago, which was for community-led crisis response systems. We want to make sure that it actually works, that money gets released when it needs to be, and that the community comes together to fight for that. We want to make sure that there's cash compensation and land returned and guarantees around housing. So to build all of this, it's about everyday people, training our people up. Just like our ancestors studied, actually thinking together about what strategies look like. Oftentimes in New Jersey, I think people want to mobilize, but most of the organizing happens before there's ever a mobilization. It is holding the meetings where people think together, come up with strategies. Like actually, I just left leading a strategy session for several organizations across this state so that we can actually win. It's that deep thinking and always going back to it, reclaiming the narrative, and just really pushing. I think right now we're in a place where we are under attack from all avenues, right? It feels like every single day there is something else. And all those something else are very well thought out strategies that are being implemented. We, all of us that believe in freedom, need to have a really good strategy about how are we building for the next 10 years. This is not just about one piece of legislation. That's why this report is so valuable. It gives us a checklist of things that we can go after, one after another after another. And that requires local organizing just as much as statewide organizing and building the leadership of tomorrow, right? Most people who are organizers, somebody found them in a coffee shop having a conversation or walking down the street, or they walked into a place. It's about finding those people, having those conversations, and giving people an offer into leadership where people will walk beside them. And for us at Faith in New Jersey, that looks like us helping to coach and get people to the level where they can pretty much do anything. And that is what organizing organizations are doing right now. We are building a base of people who can think, move, pivot, and grow a base of people. Because at the end of the day, guess what? There is more of us than there is that top 1% that's benefiting from this horrible imagination that's coming to fruition. So I just really want to close with, I know we're about at time, that we need to build power in New Jersey that actually remembers the past, restores our people, repairs the harm, and let people lead. Let the captives go free. Get our beloveds that are within the carceral system, many of which, like George Jackson, have had the time to sit and really trace back how our system structure and how the impact of enslavement has actually impacted them. And let our juries reflect our communities, make sure that people can actually get access to phone calls that are incarcerated. We have a loved one within our organization that calculated how much they had to pay for talking to their loved one to maintain connections over time during their incarceration. $50,000. $50,000. That money could have gone into our communities. That money could have been used for so many things for their family to actually be able to benefit and to be able to grow. We need to do all of these things to fight back from those that are benefiting from our pain, which is this prison industrial complex. It is so many people that are benefiting from the fact that we still have the remnants of redlining. We still have segregated schools. I know I look young, but even in my lifetime, my school system, my 5th grade class had to be desegregated, and we are still fighting to this day. We need to be aware that we are under the same systems, and we need to start to tell the truth Like my grandmother used to say, tell the truth and shame the devil, right? So that we can actually move our people. So that's just a little bit about what needs to happen, but it's really about being strategic, developing everyday people and honoring their wisdom, honoring the truth, and honoring our ancestors that have already taught us the way. And I just want to say one last thing. I'm starting to feel like a Baptist preacher. Is that we cannot operate in a place of, well, this worked last year and the year before, let's just continue to do that. Black and brown folks have been organizing for as long as we've been around. And what we know is that we need to use tactics that we have learned from maybe elsewhere or our current imagination, and not rely on that which has not served us. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Charlene, for those, words of wisdom, I think lessons and just words of encouragement to prepare us and keep us strong for the fight ahead. As we've all said throughout tonight, reparations is it's not a new fight. It's not a new movement. It's not a new journey. It's one that, we know we are part of a larger, history, and that's still ongoing. And so, we're coming up on time here. I want to go to the next slide and just share some closing reflections and next steps to recap and leave you with some key takeaways from what everybody has shared here tonight. We will have a moment for questions, so please, y'all, please start dropping any questions that you may have for our speakers in the chat, and we're going to get to those in just 1 second. We also have a few additional resources to share with you at the end if you can stay on for just a few moments. But some key takeaways from what was shared here tonight. Number one, I think we can all agree the history is clear, right? The New Jersey Reparations Council report provides a historical narrative, right? And it is a document that can help us and allow us to tell the truth about what happened here, which is that New Jersey profited from and perpetuated slavery for a very, very long time. Right? They fought to keep this institution of slavery alive. And so it's important that, number one, we look back, we reckon with that truth so that we can look forward to what real justice and what real liberation can look like. The second thing is that, again, as reparations is not just about the past. I think, many times we hear from some folks that this happened too long ago, or that we need to move forward. And we need to be clear, reparations is not just about the past, but it's also about the future, right? And world building, as Laisa said. And the Reparations Council report gives us a roadmap for transformative policies that can begin to get us to the point of repairing harm and building equity and a just future, right? The third thing to remember is that change does not happen without us, right? Organizing for reparations is going to require sustained community power, unity, and pressure, right? At all levels, in all spaces. And the fact is that every single one of us on this call, and many more who couldn't be here tonight, but that we know are with us or will join us, every single one of us has a role to play, right? And we have to get in where we fit in. So if you're wondering and asking yourself, what can I do? What do I do next? What comes next after this? I got you. We're gonna share a few ways that you can take action and stay involved. But next, fourth takeaway is that Black August calls on us not only to remember the origins and the fights of political prisoners and revolutionaries, freedom fighters, both here in the U.S., but also, the larger history of Black resistance, across the world. It not only calls on us to remember that, but also to act, right? And so we can honor our ancestors and these freedom fighters by continuing the fight for freedom and justice today, which is why finally it's so important for us all to stay connected, right? Stay connected and to take meaningful actions. I know there was a lot shared in the chat today. I know Zaid shared some actions you can take to connect with and support political prisoners. So we'll make sure to share all of that in the chat. But we also have 2 key actions that you can take this month during Black August to move forward together with us on this journey. And that is by joining us next week on our Black August Day of Action, taking place on Tuesday, August 12th, in collaboration with many of the same organizations who supported this evening's program. We are going to be having a two-part day of action to continue this momentum and to continue building our movement. So part one is a workshop called Stories for Justice, Narrative Power Training, and it'll be a narrative action workshop. This workshop, this event basically recognizes that our stories are important and our stories are power, right? And so, as of right now, we know that we are not necessarily in control of our stories and our history and how these things are being taught, and that is limiting to what our society imagines as being possible, what we imagine as being necessary. And so we understand that these narrative roadblocks, they are obstacles, but we can overcome them. And so Tuesday afternoon's workshop is going to be completely focused on learning how narratives drive movements, practicing crafting your own story for social change, and joining a collective storytelling action that will support the broader call for reparations. Part two later that evening is actually going to be a community listening and power building phone bank. We know that we can't build a movement without listening to the people who are most impacted by New Jersey's history, anti-Black history of slavery and anti-Black racism, right? And so we hope you all will join us for this phone bank where we're going to be calling residents, particularly Black residents from around the state, to talk to them, hear their thoughts on reparations, what they see as reparations, what they believe is possible around reparations in this moment, and of course to invite them to join this growing movement. So again, these are two very important actions and two steps that you can take this month to be part of this movement for reparations that's growing in the state. So we hope we'll see you there. We will put the links in the chat, but we will also be sending this out in an email to everybody. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so with that is about the end of our program, but we do want to open it up for a quick Q&A. We know we're about 5 minutes over, but if anybody has questions, please put them in the chat and we will call them out. All right, folks, I don't see any questions in the chat right now. If you do have questions, feel free to email them to us and we can share them with the appropriate speaker. If the speakers are comfortable with it, we will also share their contact information so that you can connect with them directly. Next slide, please. All right, and of course, as it was shared, I think by Charlene, maybe Baba Zaid at the top, the mantra, the kind of defining call for commemorating Black August starts with studying, right? It's study, fast, train, fight, but it starts with studying, and so we want to support you in deepening your understanding of reparations and provide tools for strengthening your organizing. So we put together a list of some additional resources, both things that you can read, but also that you can watch. We know that folks take in information and learn in different ways. And there's so much good information and resources out there. So of course, we're going to be sharing this in the follow-up email with links so that you can check them out. But feel free to take a picture right now as well.
Hi, I just saw a question. Can I answer it?
Oh,
It says that
yeah.
New Jersey is broke. Where will
Oh,
all this money come from?
yes, thank you.
I want to lift up that New Jersey spends its money on what it values, and it's time for it to readjust its values because there is plenty of money. They're just spending on things that don't value us, and it's time, if we build enough people power, to have that money shift to things that value us.
100%. Thanks so much, Darlene, for that. And thank you for the question in the chat, folks. Any other questions? All right. So with that, we'll go to our closing slide. And again, I want to thank you all for being here tonight. I want to thank all of our speakers for sharing their insight, their wisdom, these lessons, and grounding us in the histories and values of Black August. We will continue to be connected throughout this month. We will continue to study, share history, both on our social media and through some of these resources. So again, thank you all so much for being here tonight. We look forward to continuing to build power with you all, being in community with you all, and we hope you have a good night. Thank you all so much. Take care.